She did not flinch. That was the part nobody in that dining room could explain afterward. Not the hostess, who had been watching from the reservation's stand. Not the couple at table 7, who later told their friends they had witnessed the whole thing. Not even the man in the charcoal suit who sat 3 tables away and said nothing, though he saw everything. The woman at the center of it all, the one in the plain gray blazer, the one with the worn canvas tote bag hanging from the back of her chair, the one who had asked for still water instead of sparkling and had been given sparkling anyway, twice, simply looked at the restaurant manager standing over her and did not move. Did not blink too fast, did not reach for her napkin to hide her hands. She just looked at him, and that stillness, that complete and total absence of performance, was the thing that would stay with everyone long after the rest of it had played out. Her name was Celeste Okafor, but nobody at Maison Verité knew that yet. The reservation had been made 3 weeks earlier under the name C. Okafor, party of 1, 7:30 on a Tuesday. The restaurant on West 57th Street did not typically accept solo diners at prime seating on weekday evenings. The floor manager, a man named Douglas Hale, had made a note of it when the booking came through. Party of 1, no corporate affiliation listed, no occasion noted. Just a name and a credit card with a limit his system had not been able to verify, which happened sometimes with cards that had no preset spending limit. He had approved it anyway. A reservation was a reservation. But when Celeste arrived at 7:28, 2 minutes early, a habit she had never been able to shake from the years when being late meant missing the one meal she could afford that day. The woman at the reservation stand had looked at her with an expression that moved through several stages in less than 3 seconds. First confusion. Then a kind of reassessment. Then something that settled, carefully, into professional neutrality. "Do you have a reservation?" the woman asked. Celeste said that she did. She gave her name. The woman typed it into the screen and found it immediately. Because it was there, it had always been there. But her expression did not change into the warmth it usually changed into when the name matched the reservation. "Right this way," she said. The table she was led to was near the kitchen, not in the back corner that regulars dreaded. Maison Verité was too refined for that kind of obvious slight. But near enough to the service door that every few minutes a current of warm, grease-carrying air moved across the white linen. It was the table the restaurant gave to people they were not sure about. Celeste sat down. She put her canvas tote on the back of the chair. She opened the menu. She had eaten at Maison Verité once before 4 years ago with the CEO of a company she had been acquiring. She had sat at table 2, near the window, with a view of the street. The maitre had known the CEO by name. The bread had arrived within 90 seconds. Tonight, 12 minutes passed before anyone brought bread. She did not say anything. She had learned long ago that the way a person responded to being tested. And this was a test. Whether the people running it understood that or not, revealed more about their character than almost anything else. She had been tested her entire life. In the apartment she grew up in Shreveport, Louisiana, where the radiator knocked all winter, and her mother worked double shifts at the hospital laundry. In the dormitory at the State University, where she had gone on a partial scholarship and worked 20 hours a week in the library to cover the rest. In every conference room she had ever walked into, as the only black woman, in every pitch meeting where the men across the table had addressed her business partner first, in every room where she had been underestimated so completely and so consistently that she had eventually stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing a sound that has always been there. She noticed it. She just didn't perform for it. The server who finally came to her table was young, probably 23, with the slightly harried energy of someone who had been triple sat without warning. He was not unkind. He asked if she was ready to order. She said she would like a few more minutes. He said of course and disappeared. It was Douglas Hale who came to the table next. He was a compact man, early 50s, with silver hair that he kept precisely parted, and the kind of posture that came from years of telling himself and others that standards mattered. He wore a dark jacket with the restaurant's small embossed logo on the lapel. He carried himself with the specific authority of someone who has held the same position long enough that he has forgotten it was ever just a job. He stopped at the edge of her table and looked down at her. "Good evening," he said. "I wanted to check in personally." Celeste looked up from the menu. "Thank you. I noticed you were dining alone this evening." "I am." There was a pause, the kind of pause that is not really a pause but a decision being made. "This particular table," Douglas said, and his voice had the careful, cushioned quality of someone choosing each word in real time, "is typically reserved for larger parties later in the evening. We may need it back by 9. Celeste looked at him for a moment. "My reservation is for 7:30. "Of course, I just wanted to be transparent." "I appreciate that," she said, and then she looked back at the menu. He lingered for exactly 2 seconds longer than he should have. Then he left. She ordered the duck. She ordered a glass of the burgundy that was third from the bottom of the list, not because she couldn't afford anything above it, but because it was the one she actually wanted. She ate slowly. She watched the room. She noted the way the servers moved differently around different tables, the deference given to the man by the window who had been greeted by name, the speed with which the sommelier appeared at table 4, the careful, considered attention paid to the party of 8 near the center of the room. And she noted what came to her table: competence without warmth, service without welcome. She had almost finished her meal when it happened. A different server, not hers, an older man with the bearing of someone who had been there long enough to believe he knew exactly who belonged and who did not, stopped at her table with a dessert menu she had not asked for. "Compliments of the house," he said. He set it down. Then, without lowering his voice enough, he said to the server passing behind him, "She's been here almost 2 hours. Tables promised at 9. Celeste heard it. The server passing behind him heard it. The couple at the next table heard it. She set down her fork. She did not raise her voice. She did not call him back. She reached into her canvas tote, took out her phone, and sent 2 text messages. Then she put the phone face down on the table and finished the last of her wine. When the check came, she paid it. She tipped 22%, because the young server who had taken her order had done nothing wrong, and she had never believed in punishing people for the failures of the institution they worked inside. She picked up her tote bag. She walked out, and Douglas Hale, standing near the reservation stand as she passed, gave her a small, practiced smile. The kind of smile that meant nothing. The kind that said, "This transaction is complete. You may leave now." She walked out into the night air on West 57th Street and stood there for a moment. Not composing herself, she was composed. Just breathing. Just feeling the November cold on her face and letting it be what it was. Her assistant called as she was getting into the car. "Done?" her assistant said. "Done," Celeste said. The name Celeste Okafor did not mean anything to Douglas Hale that night. It did not mean anything to him the next morning, when he arrived at the restaurant at 10 to review the evening's numbers. It did not mean anything to him at 11, when he went through the reservation book and flagged the tables he wanted repositioned for the following weekend. It started to mean something at 11:47, when his phone rang and the number on the screen belonged to the restaurant's parent company, a hospitality group called Meridian Table Group, which owned 11 fine dining establishments across Manhattan, 2 in Chicago, and 1 in Los Angeles. The call was from the group's director of brand partnerships. Her name was Sasha Kim, and she very rarely called individual restaurant managers directly. "Douglas," she said, without a greeting. "I need you to walk me through last night." He did not understand what she meant. He said so. "Celeste Okafor," Sasha said. "Table near the kitchen. Party of 1, 7:30. Douglas felt something shift in his chest, not quite alarm, more like the first cold draft before you realize a window is open. "I spoke with her briefly," he said. "Is there a complaint?" There was a pause on the other end that lasted slightly longer than a pause should last. "Douglas," Sasha said slowly, "Celeste Okafor is the founder and CEO of Okafor Technology Partners. She took the company public 3 years ago. The IPO was valued at $4.2 billion. She is currently Sasha stopped. Then she started again. She is on the short list to join our board of directors. The announcement was supposed to happen next month. Douglas stood very still in the back office of his restaurant, with the reservation book open in front of him. We reached out to her office this morning, Sasha said. As part of the standard pre-announcement process, her assistant informed us that Miss Okafor has decided to withdraw her name from consideration. Silence. Her assistant cited a recent experience that gave her pause about the group's values. The reservation book was still open. Douglas could see the entry from out last night. See, Okafor, party of 1, 7:30, near the kitchen. I want a full account, Sasha said. Everything. I want it in writing by 2 o'clock. The call ended. Douglas sat down in his office chair and did not get up for a long time. He went through the evening the way you go through a memory when it suddenly matters. Not the version you lived through, easy and unremarkable, but a second version that layers meaning over every moment you hadn't thought to examine. He thought about the table near the kitchen. He thought about the 9 o'clock comment. He thought about the way she had looked at him when he told her the table would be needed back. She had not looked angry. She had looked at him the way someone looks at a thing they are deciding whether to keep or let go. He picked up his phone and called Sasha back. She did not answer. The news moved quietly at first, the way news does when it travels through professional networks rather than public ones. Someone at Meridian's Chicago office mentioned it to a colleague. The colleague mentioned it to a contact at a hospitality industry newsletter. By Thursday afternoon, the newsletter had published a short item. Prominent tech executive withdraws from board consideration at Meridian Table Group following dining experience at flagship Manhattan location. The item did not name Celeste. Industry newsletters that cared about their relationships rarely named names. But the item was seen by a reporter at a business publication who had been following Celeste Okafor's career since the Series B round that had made people first start paying attention. The reporters sent a message to Celeste's communications director. The communications director confirmed that Ms. Okafor had decided not to join the board. No further comment. That was enough. The story that published Friday morning was measured and careful. The kind of piece that does not need to shout, because the facts are loud enough on their own. It described a dining experience. It described a table near the kitchen. It described the way service moved differently, depending on who was seated where. It did not claim discrimination. It did not use that word. It simply described what had happened and let the reader do the math. By noon, the piece had been shared 40,000 times. By 3 o'clock, Meridian Table Group's communications team had released a statement expressing their deep commitment to creating a welcoming environment for all guests. The statement mentioned training. The statement mentioned standards. The statement mentioned the group's proud history of hospitality. It did not mention Celeste Okafor by name. She saw the statement. She was in her office on the 42nd floor of a building in Midtown, in a meeting about a supply chain acquisition that had nothing to do with any of this, when her communications director slid a printed copy across the table to her. She read it. She nodded once. She slid it back. After the meeting, she stood at the window for a few minutes looking at the city. She had looked at this city from windows like this one for 11 years now, ever since the first office she'd rented. A single room in a shared space in Brooklyn, with a view of a parking garage, and she was still not tired of it. Still not over the specific feeling of being here, of having made it here, of having started in Shreveport, with nothing that the world recognized as valuable, and having built something that the world could not ignore. Her assistant, a young woman named Bria, who had been with her for 3 years and who had the rare quality of knowing when to speak and when not to, appeared in the doorway. The Meridian CEO's office called again, Bria said. Celeste turned from the window. "Third time today?" she asked. "Fourth," Bria said. Celeste considered this. Send them the same response. Bria nodded. She had sent the same response 3 times already. Miss Okafor appreciates the outreach and has no further comment at this time. And the journalist from the Times, Bria added, is asking for a quote, for a follow-up piece. Celeste thought about this for a moment. She thought about Douglas Hale and his careful, practiced smile. She thought about the table near the kitchen. She thought about being 22 years old and working library, closing shifts and eating the free bagels they put out in the break room before throwing them away because she could not always afford dinner. She thought about every room she had ever walked into where someone had looked at her and immediately begun calculating what she was worth based on information that had nothing to do with what she had actually built. Tell her, Celeste said slowly, that the story isn't about me. The story is about every person who sat at that table near the kitchen who didn't have the option of withdrawing from anything. Bria wrote it down. Celeste looked back at the window. The full story came out the following week in a long-form piece that ran on a Sunday. It was the kind of article that moves slowly and carefully and does not make arguments so much as assemble evidence until the argument makes itself. It talked about maison vérité. It talked about the table near the kitchen. It talked about the industry newsletter item and the board withdrawal. But it also talked about something else. Something the reporter had spent the week researching after Celeste's communication director had quietly shared a few names and said nothing else. It talked about patterns, other diners, other evenings, other tables near the kitchen, or by the service door, or in the back corner, that Maison Vérité was too refined to have, but had in effect, had always had, in the way that refined places sometimes hold their biases so delicately that they can be mistaken for something else. A professor from Columbia who had been seated at the bar despite a confirmed table reservation. A surgeon from Mount Sinai who had been asked twice to confirm her reservation while the couple behind her had been waved through. A woman who ran a nonprofit in the Bronx and who had been, on 2 separate occasions, 2 years apart, given the same table near the kitchen. None of them had said anything publicly, not because they hadn't noticed, but because noticing and saying something are 2 entirely different decisions, and the cost of saying something is not equally distributed. Douglas Hale was placed on administrative leave the Monday after the Sunday piece ran. The statement from Meridian Table Group this time was longer and did not mention training. It mentioned accountability. It mentioned a review of practices. It mentioned that the group was committed to ensuring all guests felt equally seen and valued. The hospitality industry publication that had first broken the item ran a follow-up. Then a second. By the end of the month, 2 other restaurants in the Meridian Group had been named in similar accounts, both of which had been sitting in people's memories for years, waiting for a moment when the temperature of the room suggested it was finally safe to speak. Meridian's group bookings fell. 2 corporate accounts canceled. A planned expansion into a new property in Washington, D.C. was quietly delayed. Celeste was not watching any of this unfold from a position of triumph. That was not her nature, and had never been. She was watching it, the way she watched most things, with attention, with some sadness, and with the particular calm of someone who had known the outcome was a possibility from the moment she sent those 2 text messages in the restaurant and put her phone face down on the table. She had not set out to cause any of this. She had set out to have dinner. The 2 messages she had sent that evening were not warnings or ultimatums. One was to Bria, telling her that she would be ready for pickup in 30 minutes. One was to a friend, a woman she had known since college, a journalist, whose beat was business and whose instinct for a story was as good as anyone Celeste had ever met. The message had said, simply, "I just had a very interesting dinner. Call me tomorrow if you want to know about it." She had not told her friend what to do with it. She had not asked for anything. She had only offered the information, the way she offered most things, cleanly, without conditions, and let the other person decide what it was worth. Her friend had decided it was worth a great deal. Celeste thought sometimes, in the weeks that followed, about the other women, the professor, the surgeon, the woman from the Bronx. She thought about the specific mathematics of invisibility. The way it accumulates, interest on a debt that was never yours, compounding over years until the weight of it is so familiar it starts to feel like just the weather. She thought about her mother, working double shifts in Shreveport. About the way her mother had come home some nights, with the particular silence of someone who has absorbed too many small indignities to name them all. Her mother had never named them. That was the generation she came from, a generation that survived by containing, by absorbing, by not giving anyone the satisfaction of seeing what it cost. Celeste had inherited her mother's stillness, but she had also inherited something her mother had not had access to, a position from which the cost of speaking was manageable. Not zero, it was never zero, but manageable. That was the thing she thought about most. Not what she had done, but what it had required to do it. The specific accumulation of a specific kind of power that allowed a person to send 2 text messages and put their phone face down on the table without shaking. And the fact that most of the people who had sat at that table near the kitchen had not had that, and the fact that they should not have needed it. The board position she had declined at Meridian Table Group was offered, 3 months later, to someone else. She was not invited to reconsider and did not expect to be. She was invited, in that same month, to speak at a conference on equitable business practices. She accepted. She stood at the podium in a room of 400 people, many of them executives, many of them the kind of people who run the institutions that decide what welcome looks like. And she said what she had told Bria to tell the journalist. The story is not about me. She said it plainly, without performance, without the specific cadence of a speech that has been practiced too many times. She said, "Every industry has a table near the kitchen. You know the one you give to people you're not sure about, the one you justify to yourself in the language of logistics and availability when the real language is something older and harder to admit." She said, "The question is not what you do when someone with leverage sits at that table. The question is what you do on all the evenings before that. On the evenings when no one is going to write a piece, when there's no industry newsletter, when the person sitting there doesn't have a communications director or a friend with a byline. What do you do then?" She looked out at the room. Nobody answered. But that was the point. The question was not supposed to be answered in that room. It was supposed to be carried out of it. She stepped back from the podium, and in the back of the room, a woman who ran the front of house at a hotel in Midtown Manhattan took out her phone and wrote herself a note. 2 sentences. She would look at it the following Monday morning before the first shift began. And she would think about it, and it would change, in small and specific ways, something about how she did her job. That was not the story that made the news. But it was the one that mattered.